So really, and in fact, I'm going to use ScalaDraw here too for a new. Let's see if we can do a new one. I'm not even going to worry about ScalaDraw. Really, as you do more and more of this, the best way to really start to connect these dots is start with the browser. And actually, I am going to do an ScalaDraw. Let's see how we. Yeah, we'll just do it over here. I'll just do it with a little bit of text. Because what do we have? We have the browser. We have, let's call it Django project routing. And we'll put that here. And we'll put that here. And we'll call it Django app number 1 routing. And as an example, Django app number 2 routing. Right. And the browser is where everything starts. And maybe we have a request for get polls. Let's see, what is one of the routes that we currently have? Child page. Get polls. Child page. I'll draw some boxes. We'll draw some circles. And over here with Django, we've got admin, we've got polls, and let's add back in cats. We still have cats. And what we've done is Django says polls go there. In fact, what I will do, I think, to make this a bit easier is let's actually make a cats app. And so now I have a polls app, I have a cats app. So normally copying and pasting code is not a good idea. I will say when you're working sort of in a project and you're doing lots of things that are similar, honestly, in a professional setting, it's not uncommon to take one file and that's sort of your reference and you copy it over and paste it and use it for the other. I'm not, I have a little bit of conflicting advice around if I really want to encourage people to be doing that or not. But this is one of the less bad situations in terms of learning to copy paste, because really what it is setup stuff. Again, the rule, if you copy and paste, know what you're copying and pasting. And then from dot import views, and let's do a striped and what, a tabby cat. And I am going to refer to my other code to make sure I have this set up right. And I am going to refer to my other polls app view. and do exactly what I just said, and a bit of copy and pasting to get familiar. And we had let's leave the index and we'll call this cat's page for the moment. We'll call this striped cat. Tabby cat. And because I created a new app, I do have to add it in settings PY. And actually, let's not do that and see what happens. Oh, and the last piece of the puzzle is let's go back to this URLs PY and let's point this to the cat's app. So to recap, there is no base route right now with Django. And in fact, there's no nothing because my server is not running. Cat's app view has no attribute tabby cat. So this is telling me I probably made a typo.
Yeah, you just had a capital, and I think you've used there.
Yep, thank you. Awesome. And that's why errors are really your friend. Really, life is hard when something goes wrong and you don't have an error message. So to recap, when I make an HTTP request, and let's clear this and let's see if we can we'll make this a bit bigger so we can see the request. Right, the browser sends an HTTP GET request to our base route /admin. From here to here, admin, it's one of the pre-installed Django apps modules, so there probably actually is one. It probably is a Django app under the hood. However, because it's somewhere in like the .vem lib file, it's harder to look at, so we're not going to actually look at that code. But that's where that goes. More interestingly, with our polls, right, again, to sort of follow the flow, it goes from the browser to Django project routing that says, hey, we do have a route, a path, polls, that matches the URL in that HTTP GET request from the browser. Right here. And let's bring that one there. Django says, hey, great, send that HTTP request on to the URLs, PY, the URL patterns for the polls app. The polls app says, hey, we already know we're dealing with polls. We already covered that part of the route. We don't need to worry about it. Django probably doesn't even pass it on. So it just is looking at this and it says, hey, I do have a path that matches that. Let's call this view index function. If I comment this out and do this again, we'll get an error. However, child page still works because that route exists, right? Now, if I didn't get something wrong with cats, 404 not found. Let's see. Maybe tabby. The tabby cat actually works, which leaves me a little surprised because I didn't add it as an app in settings PY. I'm not going to lie. I actually thought that would break. Maybe the Django routing logic does not depend on this. However, once we start looking at things like authentication and certain things that middleware does, other things will break. So you really do have to make sure to add this here. I thought that was going to break and I was a little surprised. So we have this other app with this other route. Again, at the project level, we have this one layer of routing, our top level routing really. Forgive me, we're looking at the polls app here. Let's make sure we're looking at the right one. Admin, polls, and cats. Cats get sent over here. The cats part of that URL is already handled. Django probably doesn't even pass it on. And here we've got striped and tabby. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and add an index path, which is just going to be views.index. And the interesting thing is, let's see if what happens if I put it there. Okay, it doesn't make a difference. And so now we have that index. And so does that help a little bit? And let me share this diagram as well to sort of illustrate this a little. And this should be obviously polls app routing, and this should be cats app routing. And I'm sorry that the wires are literally crossed. That was just from doing this on the fly. Does that help illustrate the behavior of routing in Django a little bit with the higher level project routing that then gets sent to apps which have their own routing? Awesome. Yeah, great question. And that's a great thing to review. I don't know if someone will ask this, but presumably there's no reason why you couldn't have an app point to some other app, something like this. This might or might not work with Django. Even if it worked, you would not want to do it because at that point you are making life extremely complicated. So let's add a couple more views to the polls, just playing with a little bit of the URL parameters that we saw yesterday to refresh ourselves. And let me close out some of the files that we don't need as we do this. And we really only need the polls. Excellent pun. I appreciate that. Let's add a couple things. See here. I want to actually add URLs for it is confusing. It is easy to get confused by myself. I'm not gonna lie, I just confused myself now. So definitely don't get down on yourself if you get a little lost in the beginning. I think keeping these organized, keeping comments here. Sometimes I will write stuff down on paper. There are a lot of tricks and things you can do to kind of help keep your world organized. So I do want to add a couple paths here. The whole idea of the poll app was to be able to poll to ask for questions. So we're going to create a path for a question ID. And there's a route that doesn't exist yet. So let's create that as well. And if you're not familiar with being able to use tab in VS Code for autocomplete, I highly recommend it. You can also hit enter. It's good because it helps avoid typos. And if you're not getting autocomplete when you expect it, that often indicates you might have forgotten something somewhere else. And we'll use an F string. and a little bit of string interpolation just to get this going. And I really like testing my work as I go. Let's see. Did I get something wrong here? Use that detail. There's clearly something I missed. This looks right. I'm not quite sure why. So this is actually a good teaching moment. VS Code is not perfect. I indeed had created this method here. VS Code was telling me it didn't exist because I wrote this bit of code first. You probably would actually want to write the method first. I think it's good to always keep your code in a good working state. I thought I would sort of illustrate this. And in that vein, in terms of keeping code in a good working state, we are going to test out what we just did to make sure everything works, which it does, which is great. And let's add a couple other views here for this polls app, just so we have a bit more to play with. And I am going to do a bit of copy work here. And I think we'll just add the results so that we can kind of keep the ball rolling. And we may not have seen this yesterday, but there's no reason why the URL parameter part of a path can't come first. And now if I do this, maybe it's result singular. It looks like I have a typo. Invalid syntax, perhaps I forgot a comma. Perhaps I did. And actually that was pretty great of Django's error message to tell me exactly what was wrong. And it looks like we have one other issue here.
Your page redirect is supposed to be results instead of result.
Thank you. That would be a thing. That's why programmers get obsessive about naming. And this is great. And this is a really common pattern when constructing URLs for web applications, right? Because really now this is a resource in some way. And there might even be a table in a database, like a questions table, and there's a row for question 12, and we can store all sorts of information about it, and we can look at results and other things. So I want to keep running with this and flesh this out a bit and add some actual data to play with. And for the moment, we are just going to add the data hard-coded here in the views.py file. And I am just going to copy and paste it in from the lesson, as there's no value in me typing this all out by hand. This would actually all be in a database. However, to kind of just build this up step by step, it's not the worst thing to put this here and show this. And I think I do want to circle back and add one more path and view so we can look at more of these details. Actually, I think I'll do that as we flesh this out. And let me quickly go over what this mock data or fake data or seed data is that we're looking at here. it's pretty straightforward in that we have a list. And I believe this is actually, yeah, I think we've got a dictionary here. I get confused with JSON sometimes between Python and JavaScript. But we have a dictionary of items, essentially, or a list of dictionaries, essentially, of maps. And you see there's a lot of nesting here. And we have this, each question has an ID, right? And I'll use VS Code's folding so we can look at it a little easier. And we can see we've got 2 questions in the list. Question has an ID, it has text, a date of publication, and each question has 2 choices. And you can vote for it. So a little bit of fake data just for us to play with. And I think what we want to do, since we have this data, is we need to return something a bit more than just like hello and this is that. I think it's time now to actually start writing some HTML and using Django templates to do this. And this is where it gets interesting and useful. So I'm going to make sure I'm in the right place, first of all, in the polls app. And I do want to create a directory. Let's see. I will admit this is where Django gets a little bit confusing. In terms of all of the directories that I am about to create. And I think I'll do this from the command line because I think that's going to be easier. Yeah, let's see if we actually need all of these directories or not. Let's see how we can do with this. Inside our polls app, we're going to create a directory named templates. And let's see if it works to just put our index HTML page there to get the ball rolling. And just to make sure this works, I'm not going to worry about doing anything fancy with my template right now. I'm just going to add it there, and I'm going to see if we have this working with it in the right directory. And then we'll circle back to putting in some data. And in my index view, this is where I want to go ahead and actually start using stuff. And from Django, let's see, is it?
I think it's is it shortcuts?
Oh, you might be right. Thank you.
For render,
For render,
I think.
you're totally right. That's exactly what I was wondering. Thank you. Django had actually put that there for us, and I deleted it because we weren't using it. And then I forgot what it was. So, excuse me. So I'm just going to comment that line out for the moment. I'll delete it in a minute. And this is basically a Django helper function. We're going to see that we can do a lot more with Django templates, but the essence of a Django template is we write an HTML file and we use a special sort of syntax to insert little bits of logic and data into it. And then what our Django web server does is at the right time, it takes the HTML file, it takes the bits of logic and data, sticks some more stuff in the HTML file, some text and things like that, and sends it all back to the browser. And we'll see that in just a minute. I'm going to get just the initial version of this set up and see how this works.
So is this normally where, once we get a little farther in, React ends up taking over once we start to talk about like the front end sort of things and displaying items on web pages?
Yeah, exactly. To go back to model view controller, this is really kind of becoming our view. Django calls these view functions in terms of kind of relating it to like the more standard parlance. This would be maybe a bit more of a controller function, right? It takes the requests, it controls what we do with it, it handles rendering the view. And right now, this hard-coded data is our model. Later on, we'll use actual Django models, and we'll see that soon. And you're absolutely correct that another way, a more modern way of building web applications, which has a lot of benefits, but isn't always better. Both are valid approaches, is this whole view bit and a lot of this controller logic. Let's use JavaScript because it runs in the browser, and this incredible JavaScript front-end framework React.js has been written, and that runs in the browser and does the work of rendering everything the user sees on the screen and talks to our backend. And we just kind of have the controller and the model back here. Yeah, so that's spot on. You're exactly right. And I suspect that I do indeed need another directory layer, which I am not going to lie, is one of the downsides of using these batteries included frameworks like Django. So let me make sure this works. And then if it does, I will explain what I just did. So I may have gotten my directory naming wrong. Let me double check here. And I think the place I'm going to start for my own sanity is going back to that settings py file that we've been talking about. And let's see what it's telling us about where it goes to look for templates. And it doesn't have a lot of information. And at this point, actually, I might as well use this as a bit of a teaching moment. Let's see if we can get this templating set up correctly. So part of the problem might be Maybe this needs to be polls app. I think it might not be, because Django does some clever stuff with naming. I may have just resolved that. Yep. And just to double check, we'll change this. We'll watch this change there, and we're good to go. So there were two things I was doing wrong. One of them I may not have needed to change, but the most important one was a simple, not a typo, but a programmer error, is that when you render a template, this render function needs two things: the request object that handles the request, and the path to where the template is. And the path starts with the name of your app. And I had that name wrong. And then it has the name of the HTML file. And for the moment, I am going to trust our lesson plan here that unfortunately this like doubly nested directory structure is correct. So we have the basics of some more improved view logic working here, and we can start to add on to it now. And the first thing I want to show you in that regard is how we pass information in. So let's create a dictionary. Right, pretty straightforward. The key is foo, the value is bar. Let's pass this dictionary in to this render function. And what this does, let me close the one that is old out, is it will take our Django template and this data, and it will interpolate them together. It will combine them. And let me show you how that works in the simplest way. So the Django template syntax, it should look a little reminiscent of an F string. We use two curly brackets. And what we have to know is we do have to know the shape of the dictionary that we're passing in here. And so I do have to know that this dictionary has a key named foo. And that's what I'm depending on here. And hopefully we'll see bar printed out to the screen, which is awesome. And this is part of why, even though React is more and more common, there's some value in seeing this approach to see how it's done and to understand a bit more of what's going on here. And I just want to check in and see what questions people have, especially as I jumped around a bit, and just to give us a pause for a moment. And let me quickly check the chat. Yes, the foobar I'm pretty sure that the term migrated from the military into computer science academia post World War II, probably through like MIT or something like that. Because the main teacher for my computer science program in college used that term, and it's all over the place. And I'm pretty sure that's how it entered the programming world. So what I'm going to do is flesh out this example, and then we'll take a break. And then we can keep on going. So to make it more interesting, what we really want to do is take this much more complex dictionary, right? That's actually a list of dictionary with nested layers, and add things in. And so what I actually want to do here is let's yeah, I think we should do it this way. And let me explain why. And let me make a change here. And actually, let me show you, first of all, what happens. So this is actually your worst case scenario as a software developer. Something just broke, but there's no error messages and everything's working. This is one of the challenges with the whole template approach, and the challenges of like sort of the magic part of what's going on here, and that and anything when you start like kind of pushing more and more stuff into strings, that's really about like program behavior, because we're not seeing anything on the screen. I don't have an error message in the console. Network tab is fine, and there's no error here, and we're not seeing anything because foo is gone. Now, Django templates, if instead of 2 curly brackets, you use a curly bracket and a %. And what this is these are the escape characters from HTML into like a very simple, it's definitely a derivation of Python, but it's not full-blown Python, though it might be full-blown Python. Some relatively close, enough to do basic things. We can add bits of logic. And now we don't see that at all, because this key foo does not exist in the dictionary that we send over. And if I change this, we can change this back to foo bar. Now this shows up again. So Django server side running in our server program is interpolating with this logic and this template system data with our HTML template, and we can add in CSS and things like that. And it's all sent over the wire, so to speak, over the internet, back as an HTTP response. And in fact, we can see that here. If we look at the response, this is where the network tab is useful and things start to get a bit more interesting. We can preview, and we can look at the full response, and we can see this, right? And if we get rid of that, that would be the old one. That's gone, right? The HTML gets rendered in our server application in Django, and then it's sent to the client. To use React.js, where it's JavaScript running in the browser, we would put logic like this in that browser program in the client, right? The client-side rendering. There's pluses and minuses to both approach. Obviously, or I shouldn't say obviously, but templates are kind of notoriously unliked and a little frustrating because it's not a real programming language, so you don't get as good an error message, and for lots of other reasons. And that's actually a big part of why React.js took off, because it turns out that the best templated language in the world for web pages is using JavaScript with a good front-end framework. There are pluses to not going down that road, but that's a bit of a different conversation. So I think I'll just leave that there as an example. And it's tricky, like, how do we add comments? I don't actually remember. Like, the syntax just starts to get really funny. Actually, I apologize. I do remember. It's just normal HTML. This is example of a little logic checking if a key exists and doing conditional rendering, right? We only render, display this HTML if this condition is met. It's going to be a lot more interesting with this latest question list that has a lot of big stuff. And I'm just going to run through the rest of the example here to show a bit more of kind of everything that we can do. The truth is, in practical terms, I don't really recommend using lots of if statements and logic. It can get confusing. And as you can see, we still have a silent error case. Like, if foo is not available, maybe that's okay, and we can show something to the viewer. Or maybe foo is not available because something is broken and now we have no idea. So you really want to keep your templates relatively simple. And what I'm going to do now is write a bit of HTML and template logic so that we can list and display and render these questions. And I'll catch up on the chat, and this will take just a minute to type out on it. So as I'm doing this, if anyone has questions, this is actually a great time. And you can note here that the Django template language includes basic for loops. And this is where it's not exactly Python, because this is template logic. We need like an end block, because it would just be too much to ask our templating system to get that smart. And you don't really want a smart templating system. Like, what you really want is you want most of this logic pushed out into your view function here. And if we have time, that might be a nice thing to do to refactor this to do that. And what we're going to do is make a list of items that are links. And these links we're going to construct. And this is where stuff does get kind of cool, with being able to use templates to interpolate data and logic, and where Django can be really great. You can do this, of course, with React.js, and it works quite well. There is a certain elegance to doing it on the server side. But this is where I think stuff really starts to get exciting in web application development, because now we're dynamically constructing a web page that's actually going to do something. And I think what I am going to do is do a little bit of structuring here to help see what's going on. So we're going to have list items, and inside each list item is going to be a link. And the descriptive text for that link will be the question text. And you'll note one of the big downsides of this template logic is we don't get good autocomplete. And let me actually see if there's a VS Code plugin for that.
Django docs will have the syntax of the stuff, right?
Django docs will have the syntax with stuff, yes. I would recommend our lesson for today is pretty good. And actually, what I recommend, And just to share my process here, I literally just Googled for Django template VS Code and Django template. So again, evaluating this 580,000 installs, that tells you a lot of people are using it, and it probably works. And it's got 4 stars. You know, no one really does the ratings. Sometimes I'll look to see in case someone says, hey, it's broken. It seems like it works, so it's worth a shot. I'll share this in the chat in a moment. And with luck, that actually might make working with Django templates a lot friendlier for us. And this again is why you really want to, and in fact, it looks like there's a whole Django plugin that has 6 million installs. I'm just going to go ahead and install that. And let's see what that does. And lo and behold, things are blue. Let's see if, and look at that. We're starting to get autocomplete. Well, I'm not sure about the autocomplete, but this alone is an improvement from what we had a minute ago. And my very rough process is one extension had 500,000 installs. The other one had 6 million. Let's go with the 6 million one. And so if you just in VS Code extensions search for Django, double check that the first one is the one with 6 million installs and install it, I think that will actually probably help a lot as we do our Django development. And let's see if this works. It does. We've got polls and we've generated links. And when we click on those links, our Django app does routing to another page. So I'm actually quite excited. And I will add a bit more logic here. Yeah, I won't worry about the if statements. I think, yeah, why not? And this actually is not perfect because question list might exist, but it might be empty. But that's honestly a little too out of scope, I think, for what we're doing right now. And so I have decided that we want the user to have a good experience. And in fact, the next step, we should really add a back button here. And that does lead, I think, to the next thing for us to look at, which is doing some work with forms. And then we should look at static files as well, and a little bit more with templates. So why don't we take a 15-minute break and then we can keep rolling? How does that sound, folks? Okay. Before we break, do people have any questions as while this is all fresh in our minds? Okay, let's break and we'll come back at 11:30 and we should be able to wrap up in time for lunch. Thank you all very much. See you shortly.